How's it going? Today, we're gonna be comparing portable air compressors for RVing. Which one is best? Because it's vitally important to have your tires on the RV properly inflated, and not every compressor is able and capable of doing that. Oftentimes, we need to reach those higher PSIs, so which pumps are gonna be best suited for that? So we have a wide variety of price ranges and compressors here, so let's dive right into it and get to which one is best. So starting off first on our list is the Vier 300P. This is a 30 amp air compressor capable of going up to 150 PSI, 2.3 CFM, has a 33% duty cycle. It came with a recoil hose, has an analog gauge on it with the ability to deflate for airing your tires down. The pump is rated at 150 PSI, but the gauge only goes up to 100 PSI. It weighs in at 8 pounds, 10.5 ounces. The overall reach with power and the hose comes to 31 feet, but this one is easily expandable because you have a 1/4 inch quick connect, so that way you can add an extra recoil hose and gain a lot of extra distance. Next on our list is the Airlift compressor. It's a 120 PSI air compressor at 20 amps, has a 25-minute runtime, and it's 1.97 CFM. It weighs in at 5 pounds, 5.8 ounces. It has an overall reach of 24 feet, which would be hard to add onto that if you needed extra reach. But it's a small, compact unit with an attached hose, accessories mounted to the pump, and 2 attachments for power. You have the traditional clamps for being able to connect onto a battery, but it also has a 7-way plug, so you can connect that into your 7-way on the back of your tow vehicle to be able to power this compressor. It also has a digital display on it, being able to set the exact pressure that you want your tire to be at, and will stop automatically. Next on our list is the Bulldog Winch 150 PSI. At 45 amps and 5.65 CFM and a 40-minute runtime with a resettable breaker, this is one of our bigger air compressors on this list, coming in at 16 pounds, 5.9 ounces. It's a very simple setup that comes in a bag, just the pump and the recoil hose with an analog gauge. On the back of that gauge, there is a button to be able to air down your tires if needed. The overall reach for this is 33.5 feet, which is easily expandable because of the 1/4 inch quick connect fittings. For the electrical, it has the battery clamps to be able to connect to your 12-volt source. I should mention that this is not sponsored by any of these compressors, so I'm not beholden to any of them. It's actually sponsored by eTrailer, which is a great resource for RVers. So all the links are going to be down in the description to each of these compressors and to eTrailer. Let's get to the next one, which is the Noco 100 PSI air compressor, which is a very compact unit with the hose and the cable attached. It's rated at 100 PSI, can inflate a tire in 2.5 minutes, and can run continuously for 15 minutes at 30 PSI. It has battery clamps for connecting up the electrical, and the air hose combined has a reach of 23 feet. And this one would be hard to expand. It weighs in at 6 pounds, 11.4 ounces, just showing how small and lightweight it is, and a digital display on top, giving you the pressure of the tire and a setting so it'll stop at that pressure automatically when inflating. Next up, we have the Viair 400P. This one has a large bag with accessories, has a recoil air hose with an analog gauge. It's an automatic compressor with a trigger and a button valve on the side to be able to air down tires. It's stated at 30 amps, 150 PSI, 33% duty cycle, 2.3 CFM, and shuts off automatically at 155 PSI and back on at 130 PSI. And it weighs in at 10 pounds, 10 ounces. Next up is the Bulldog onboard compressor. This will be different than the portable ones, but I wanted to see how it lined up. And it's rated at 23 amps at 200 PSI at 1.8 CFM, 100% duty cycle at 100 PSI and 50% at 200 PSI. It weighs in at 10 pounds, 12.4 ounces. It doesn't have a reach because it's meant to be hardwire, but it'll be interesting to see how this lines up against the portable compressors. Next up is Performance Tool at 150 PSI. This one has to be the smallest, lightest one in the bunch. It's at 1 pound, 1.6 ounces. It's 15 amps at 150 PSI and a stated 10-minute runtime. Has the shortest reach at 11 feet, and we don't have battery clamps on this one, so we're going to be tied to a 12-volt socket. I'll be surprised if this one does well because it feels like all plastic. The last compressor to test is the Vier 70P. This one's also small, coming in at 15 amps, 100 PSI, and the duty cycle is 30 PSI for 30 minutes, and it's a 1.06 CFM. It weighs in at 5 pounds, 5 ounces. It has a 20-foot reach. This Vier isn't really expandable, and we're going to be limited to, again, the 12-volt socket. For price, Performance Air Airtight comes in at the lowest, while Viair 400P comes in at the highest at just about $300. And in the middle of the pack, we have Viair 300P at $173, and the Bulldog Winch 150 comes in at $180. Now we're going to put all these compressors to the test and see how they actually perform in the real world. But my big takeaway from that initial look is making sure you get a compressor that's going to be able to reach all your tires, all the places that you need it to reach. The Viair 400P came in first with the longest reach, but the Bulldog Winch 150 also had great reach along with the Viair 300P. The other thing that's great about those is they're expandable, so if you needed to get a little extra reach, it's easy to add on to those. The other thing that was kind of interesting was the weight differences. I don't think there's much metal in that airtight compressor, but that Bulldog Winch, that weight kind of shows the girth and the heft and kind of the size of that compressor. It's definitely the biggest out of the bunch. But let's dive into our first test, and it's going to be taking your typical fifth wheel tire and taking it from 65 PSI up to 80 PSI. This is kind of the typical use that you have while RVing. Taking a tire that's slightly underinflated and bringing it up to pressure. And the Viair 400P pulling over 25 amps came in at 1 minute and 40 seconds to top off this tire. Next up, the portable Bulldog Winch compressor pulling 36 amps came in at 54 seconds. Pretty fast. Also a bit noisier than the 400P. Next up is the Noco 20. It allows you to set the desired PSI on top, and as it gets closer, it turns on and off a couple of times, getting to that exact PSI. And with it pulling 18 amps, it took 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Coming in behind the Bulldog and the Viair 400. Next up, we have the Bulldog onboard compressor, and it was pulling 20.4 amps, and it had a time of 2 minutes and 10 seconds. That puts it right in the middle of the field. Our next compressor is the Performance Tool Airtight. This one was going for quite a long time. I was gonna stop it at 10 minutes to not go over the recommended runtime, but it ended up burning up and smoking. So it puts it in last place, but it did bring the PSI up to 71 PSI. I'm sure all the plastic parts inside were starting to melt. Next up, we're going to test the Airlift compressor. It was pulling 26 amps and it went for 2 minutes and 33 seconds, which is pretty much a tie with the Noco 20. Next, we have the Viair 300P. It was pulling 23 amps and it went for 1 minute and 33 seconds, a pretty respectable time. That puts it in second place. Our last compressor on this test, the Viair 70P, completed the task of 80 PSI at 4 minutes and 3 seconds. So in this test, you can see that the 70P came in a distant last place that actually completed the task. The Viair 300 and 400P coming in at second and third, and the Bulldog Winch 150 coming in the fastest at first place. So now I want to see how these compressors do filling the tire up from empty. So we're going to start at 0 and go up to 80 PSI. See how long it takes and how much power it consumes. And the Bulldog Winch 150 came in first with this with 5 minutes and 36 seconds. Tied basically in second place was the Viair 400 and 300P at just over 8 minutes. Next was the Bulldog onboard compressor at an even 10 minutes. Then we had the Noco 20 coming just over 12 minutes, and then the Airlift 120 coming in at 12 minutes and 22 seconds. And the 70P didn't make it because of duty cycle, but brought it up to 65.7 PSI. And the power consumption across the board was pretty even, but the Bulldog onboard compressor came in at a 2.9 amp hours. But really, there's not a big difference. There's not a significant difference across the board. The high temperatures were actually kind of interesting. The Viair 400 and 300 were in the low 160s, and the Bulldog Winch not too far behind that at 186 degrees. But our highest temperatures came from the Bulldog onboard compressor, but also the Viair 70P coming in at 219 degrees. And of course, the Performance Air ended up melting the internals at 202 degrees. Now, a lot of RVs out there have higher PSI demand, so I wanted to test these up to 120 PSI. So we're gonna take it from 80 PSI to 120. And in this test, the Bulldog Winch again came out on top with the Viair 400p slightly behind it, with the 300p trailing more than it did in the other tests, but it was about 30 seconds behind the 400p. The Bulldog onboard compressor at 219 and the Airlift 120 at 226. The Noco 20 is only rated at 100 PSI. I also wanted to look at the pressure gauge accuracy. The worst one was the Bulldog Winch 150. It was 5 PSI off. We had the 300p and the 70p being about 2 PSI off. But the Noco 20 and the Airlift were extremely accurate, along with the 400p. But those digital readouts were extremely accurate and very convenient. Now overall, the Bulldog Winch portable compressor was the fastest, but the Vier 300 and 400p was usually at the top across all of the metrics. And when looking at pumps, something that's really important is looking at the duty cycle and what you need. For example, the Vier 300p had a 33% duty cycle. That means you can run for 20 minutes and then it needs to be off for 40 before you can turn it on again, which is totally fine when we're just topping off the tires on our fifth wheel. But if you're going off-road and you're airing your tires down from really low to highway pressure, you might be running into that duty cycle where you have to turn it off and wait a significant amount of time before you can complete the job so you don't burn up your compressor. And higher CFM means you're going to be putting more air in quicker into your tires. So a couple of metrics you'd want to pay attention to. For us, I think the Vier 400p hits that sweet spot of being really capable and compact, easy to be able to store in the truck. I prefer the battery clamps also, so I can connect that to the house battery on the RV, or I can use it in the truck on the battery there. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. But I do have to say, I did like that 7-way plug, and e-trailer does have some exclusive Viair pumps where you can get them with that 7-way plug for the power source. Again, links are gonna be down in the description. So anyways, I think that's gonna do it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope that it helped you out in some way. So if we don't see you on the road, hopefully we will. See you next video. Take care.